If you're going to have a war on drugs, should drug treatment be given a higher priority? $19 billion slated in 2001 for the federal government, federal war on drugs, another $22 billion among the states. It is certainly true in the federal government, and by and large true among the states, that the large share, the large majority of that money is devoted to law enforcement and interdiction efforts, and only a relatively small minority of that money goes to drug treatment. Rand Corporation discovers in a study, treatment is 7 times more cost-effective than law enforcement, 10 times more cost-effective than drug interdiction, and 23 times more cost-effective than trying to cut drugs off at their source in Colombia or elsewhere in Latin America. Would you, as drug czar, shift resources away from interdiction and law enforcement to treatment?
I would fully fund treatment, but what I would point out to Rand and anyone else who wants to argue the point, that most of the people who undergo treatment do not do so voluntarily.
That is true.
It is under coercion, and if it is illegal, they are under the coercion of the courts. That's how most of them get there. If you make it legal, do you want to take on the ACLU when they say, how can you compel my client to go to court or go to drug rehabilitation?
I'm not going to try to compel him. I would not.
Well, and you know what? The result is there'd be far less in terms of a percentage and probably even in absolute numbers, people going into treatment if you legalize it than if you maintain its illegality.
Let's just grant that as a political matter, for a number of reasons, a war on drugs, a major and sustained effort against drug use, is just going to be with us. Let's just stipulate that it will. The question then would be, would you favor granting the government the coercive power to force people into treatment? Would you favor a massive shifting of resources from drug enforcement and drug interdiction to treatment?
Yes, I would.
As a matter of principle, would you favor treating the war on drugs less as a matter of law enforcement?
I would do
and
both.
More.
I would do both.
You would do more.
And that's what happened during the
That's
period.
what they've been saying all these years.
That's
For
what
about
happened during the
30 years.
period that we made significant progress on containment. Now, we're never going to achieve perfection or anything close to it. But what I will tell you is that it made an enormous difference. 58 or 5.8 million to 1.3 million in a 7-year period is a very significant drop.
Even that came at too high a cost, in your view.
Oh, yes, it did. But moreover, it's very misleading. If you look over history, at periods of you have periods when drugs go up, periods when drugs go down. Without making things illegal, things can also be affected. Look at what's happened in smoking. Tobacco kills far more people than drugs do, by a multiple. By information, by knowledge, you've had a strong reduction in smoking.
So under the Milton Friedman regime, if drugs were legalized, would anti-drug campaigns still be effective? So under the Milton Friedman regime, that would not be a regime of moral laxity. It would be a regime under which drug use was legal, but that you yourself would sign up to join the anti-drug temperance society. You would want large organizations, probably voluntary in your view, to be advertising against drugs, to be speaking against drugs. You would want public pressure exerted on people to persuade them not to use drugs.
I think drugs are terrible. I think people ought not to use drugs. I think it's not in their self-interest to use drugs. But if people insist on doing things in their self-interest, who am I to stop them? What I have to do is to stop them from doing harm to other people. That's the function of government, as Pete and I agree. But I could do far more effectively stop them from doing harm to other people in a legalized regime than I can in a regime in which so-called illegal drugs are illegal.
Well, I think history contradicts that. Now, he mentioned the Dutch experience. The Dutch experience has not been a great success. If you look at the U.S. Department of Justice studies, the highest per capita crime rate to be found anywhere in Europe is in Amsterdam. If you look at the British experience, when they legalized it, allowing physicians to prescribe heroin, they experienced a 30-fold increase in heroin use. And that wasn't all of the use either. You asked a question a moment ago, Milton answered it, I didn't. You said, is the basic point that we should contain use? And the answer is absolutely. When Mr. Sterling, the director of the National Criminal Justice Foundation, was making his remarks at the Hoover Symposium in this past year, I believe. His concluding remark was that there was no question that the increased availability of drugs makes it far more difficult for teenagers to resist the temptation. Well, I can't think of anything that will more greatly increase the availability of drugs than legalizing it.
What happens under the current circumstances is that
Last word, it's television.
teenagers tend to be attracted to drugs by the fact that they're illegal. First of all, there's propaganda against drugs which is so outrageous, which is so violent, violates what they know to be facts when they're told that marijuana would eat out their brains, for example, that they come to distrust all of such statements. And, you know, the fact that it's illegal is an attraction, not a deterrent. In my opinion, there's no evidence whatsoever that legalizing drugs would cause any major increase in usage. I think you have periods when drug use goes up, periods when drug use goes down, as you do with all other human phenomena. And I think that what you have to take into account is the enormous amount of harm that the attempt to prohibit drugs does to our system of laws, to our civil liberties, to human freedom, and that we would be more effective
Pete Wilson, you've got about 20
in reducing
seconds
the use of drugs
for a
by
closing
persuasion
statement.
and by...
Drug use, legal or illegal, is a tragedy. If we're talking about hard, dangerous drugs. Drugs are not bad because they are illegal. We made them illegal because they produce tragic results. And the cost in dollars is the least of it. The human cost, the incalculable tragedy, the parents, the crack babies, that is the tragedy. And John Stuart Mill said that society has a right to protect the third parties from harm by those who would exercise their own will doing something stupid.
Pete Wilson, Milton Friedman, thank you very much. Prohibition lasted only a dozen years before the 18th Amendment was repealed. The war on drugs? The war on drugs has already lasted nearly 3 times as long. And as we just saw, the debate continues. I'm Peter Robinson. Thanks for joining us.